Big news today. Kayla Harrison is fighting Courtney King at Invicta 43 November 20th. That's right. Outside of the PFL, fighting in Invicta. That's pretty big breaking news. That's the PFL's star. That's their star going and fighting Invicta now. What do you make of that announcement?
I mean, good on the PFL for letting Kayla go get a fight since they, announced early on in the year when COVID was a thing shutting everything down. They were like, all right, we're gonna shutter the doors for the rest of 2020, and nobody's fighting here. So that's kind of frustrating if you're a fighter, because if you're a fighter, your time frame for a career is very short. Can't exactly afford to have a whole year off when you're ready to fight. That's not generally a good thing because one, that's how fighters pay their bills. Two, that's how fighters earn more money to pay their bills is by fighting and earning higher paychecks by winning. So I completely get, the frustration that Kayla Harrison was dealing with to have to go this route, to go to Invicta. And I mean, like I said, there's things about like threatening lawsuits and stuff I'm sure we'll get into here in a minute. But good on PFL for letting, literally, like you said, their star, like it's her and Lance Palmer, like carrying that PFL flag right now. So for them just to be like, all right, we'll let you go on to this other promotion that just happens to be the feeder system for women into the UFC, we'll let you go over there. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, it's crazy. You know, I spoke about this before where throughout this entire pandemic, the PFL's format has hurt it severely. This is the one time their format got in the way. I thought they did the responsible thing at the time in March and said, "Hey, you know what? We're canceling the season. We can't get this up and running." That was back when the virus was new. We didn't have a lot of information. No one was really sure you could pull off this bubble scenario, right? Long before pandemic and lockdown fatigue started to kind of loosen up the restrictions a bit, as we've seen now, especially in the United States. Um, and so it was a good play at the time because it gave them good publicity. It said, we're putting our fighters' health and safety first. Makes sense. But you can't just restart it, right? That's the one thing about this format that really hurts it is it's not like Bellator or the UFC where UFC goes ahead and says, "Nope, we're doing this. We're getting that ESPN money. I don't care. I'll shell out whatever it takes. Let's do this thing." Has very successful events. Does Fight Island. All of a sudden, we don't have fighters getting pulled for COVID, or if they are, it's being caught. Bellator sees that and says, "Okay, that's working. We're going to go ahead and do our own bubble." Invicta sees that. Okay. LFA sees that. Sure. But PFL, you can't just start a tournament now. It's not doable. So once they canceled the season, it was done. You can't reverse that. And to be one of these fighters in the PFL that is making their entire living off of fighting, which is Kayla Harrison, Lance Palmer, any of the $1 million winners, really, probably at this point could. It's got to be extremely frustrating. And we've seen other PFL guys go to regional leagues, right? We've seen Titan FC had a PFL fighter. His name escapes me, but PFL fighter has fought for Titan FC, and it kind of got lost in the news cycle where a lot of people didn't notice. Oh, hey, that's a guy under PFL contract. He's fighting at Titan FC. But they always said it was fine as long as you didn't go to the UFC, One, Bellator, the big guys, right? And it's the same situation here. They're letting Kayla to go fight, but she's not fighting at a big name organization. It's a bigger regional or seed level, right? Invicta is a big name on that stage, but it's Invicta's not trying to compete with the UFC and Bellator and One. So I get the decision here. But all that being said, this is their star. If she loses, which is unlikely, very unlikely, but if she goes out there and she loses at Invicta 43, that does irreparable damage to the brand of PFL. I mean, that just,
I'll shoot him a little bit of bail here because it also is the first time she's fighting at 145 too. So they could kind of hang their hat on that, be like, oh, she wasn't her best. She's the best at 155, you know? So they have that little bail, like just sitting there, you know? But yeah, it's still largely going to be like, oh, you came over to Invicta and you got starched. Like, not a good look for PFL. Not a good look. But I also still don't think, like, even if Kayla Harrison was to go over there and lose, I don't think that it would necessarily stick with her all that terribly because, yeah, she's dominant and she fights at, like I said, at 155, where there's not really a whole lot of other names out there that people are just like, oh, you know, that's somebody that really could go show up and, you know, be better than Kayla on every single night that a lot of people know about. I mean, there are some good fighters there, but it's nobody that people are talking about on a weekly basis, you know? So, and it's really the same at 145 outside of, you know, the ones that are in the UFC. I mean, there's a couple at Bellator, but that's about it. It's about it. It's a very, very shallow pool.
I will say this because I will again play devil's advocate here and say there are two reasons why I think that logic won't work for Kayla if she loses. And
oh, for her, it won't, for sure. For her, it'd be devastating for her. She's the hardest person on oneself ever. I think.
Yeah, that's good catch there. Yes, she would be furious regardless and upset. There's no doubt there. But I still think it would hurt PFL's brand because you're looking at one again. It's the star of this was how the whole organization was built. Chris Cyborg did those brutal cuts down to 145. She never lost, right? She lost against Nunes, who is considered at this point the female greatest of all time. Other than that, she still looked dominant. She still got out there. And Cyborg is probably one of the few fighters that could have challenged Kayla and been a 155er, right? That was more of her natural weight class. To go down to 140, 145 was brutal for her, but she still went out there and dominated. And then the other part is, okay, you could still give Kayla some slack because not everyone can do that. But her opponent is 4-1, hasn't fought in about a year, doesn't really have any big, you know, names under. I think her biggest name is Colby Northcutt from an amateur bout. I think that's the most recognizable name on that list. We're not talking about the Invicta featherweight champion or an Invicta featherweight contender that's probably going to get called up to the UFC or Bellator or something. We're talking about someone who really, you know, even in the promo, it looks like they just kind of copied and pasted a picture of her. It's not definitely not someone you look at and say, oh, that's a real threat to Kayla Harrison. So if she loses, I think that really undermines the credibility and branding of the PFL, especially since it was the first star that they really tried to build the whole organization around.
No, 100%. And I mean, look, it's kind of interesting also from PFL standpoint that their star is fighting in a co-main now in Invicta. She's not the main event. So it's also another little thing that could, you know, if she does lose, that's another thing that could, you know, really kind of backfire on them. But again, I don't think that happens. I think Kayla Harrison goes out there and absolutely waxes this Courtney King. And I expect it to, you know, look like another walk in the park for her. And she could go out there and get 30-26s and be like, I hate myself for that fight right now. that's how hard she is on herself. But to go back to one other thing that, you know, is still ongoing is that they still have these lawsuits that they're seeking out because PFL, like we said at the top, shut down the whole thing for all year long. And there was some sort of compensation packages for some of these fighters, but apparently it's not enough. They're not happy about it. They weren't able to compete. So even though that Kayla Harrison is going to be on this card for Invicta, you know, I'm still seeing things saying that, hey, we're still going through with that. Like, we still want money. We still want back pay, because it's not my fault that you guys couldn't figure out a way to make fights happen when other organizations have been.
Yeah, I mean the lawsuits are. It's been a back and forth as Jason Cruz, notable MMA lawyer, has pointed out. It's very weird to get on Twitter and get on social media and say like, "Hey, we're gonna file a lawsuit here." Like, if you're going to file, you file, right? Like that's generally what happens. So I think there are probably some things in the contract that would make it pretty hard to actually go through with it. And my guess is we'll never see them. But my guess is they've probably talked to lawyers. Lawyers have been like, it would be a real uphill battle. So instead, fighters have taken to social media to try and put the pressure on PFL to do this. I am happy that Kayla is getting money. You're right. No matter what they're paying her in terms of the stipend and all that, it's not what she could earn if she was fighting regularly, especially for any of the top guys at PFL. That's got to sting. This gives them some options. I'm glad they got the deal done here. Uh, does it stop the legal issues? I don't know. Again, for me, I think if they were going to file, they would have already done it, and I'm assuming that that's kind of dead in the water because of something in the contracts that we don't know about. Just from what we've seen in other fighter lawsuits, right? Whether it's the UFC or Canelo recently, right? They just file it. So at this point, I think it's probably something is stopping them from doing that, and this is probably the best they're going to get.
Oh yeah, 100%. And one other thing, like you mentioned earlier, the fact that the PFL season is set up so differently, the draw, the allure of PFL is that big $1 million check at the end of the season, right? So even just getting back into the swing of things, you're still that much farther off from the thing you're here for this organization to compete for. So you're fighting like for, not the smallest checks in the world, but you're not close to that $1 million opportunity. So I completely understand all of this, man. And it sucks that
Yeah.
it's happening to these guys.
Yeah, it really does. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Let us know in the comments, do you think it hurts PFL's brand like I do irreparably if Harrison goes out there and lose? Do you think they're going to get a little bit more slack like Matt's saying? How do you guys feel as fans? Do you think it's fair to the fighters to kind of keep them from going to a place like One or Bellator or UFC to earn real money, especially if they're a bigger star? Let us know. Love to see those comments on that because I am genuinely curious how y'all feel about it.